Hey, folks. Good evening. It is 9 o'clock Central Standard Time, 10 o'clock Eastern, and I think we've got a couple of people here. Of course, I think we're running head-to-head in conflict with Jeff Dougherty's show tonight with Rex Bear, and I apologize for that. There was not much coordination on this one, and so we're overlapping. So if you stick around here, that's just fine. If you go and you want to catch the rest of Jeff's show, you can catch this one in archive. So whichever you'd like to do. So there's the meatball checking in, Rocky Stucci. Good to have you. Casper, good to see you. And let me go through. And you know, this is the thing. When you do radio with a bunch of other guys, well, not a bunch. It's Rocky and Jeff. We try to coordinate it with each other, just to make sure we're not stepping over each other's, overlapping each other's shows. I'm going to be on with Rocky after this show tonight on Rocky's Situation Room. And we're going to, as it were, kick the ass of the matrix of confusion. And there's some other phrases that we use. We're sticking our finger in the hole of the dike of humanity. So that'll be Rocky and I a little later on. I join him. And that'll be after the reading tonight. And tonight's reading is actually a little shorter than the last couple of chapters we did. We're talking about Constantine and getting into some of the history. And it's just a few pages long, this chapter, as opposed to 45 or 49 pages long. And so there's Carl Mulak. Brother Carl. How you doing, sir? Good to see you. And so before I get into this too much, as you've seen, if you've been listening to some of the other broadcasts, these things, I'm building a progression in these chapters. And it's not just taking the Nephilim and trying to, here's the mythology of the Nephilim. And here's all the pop cultural BS. And what I'm trying to do is paint a more complete picture. And it's not exhaustive, as I have said. This is just my apple on the apple cart. Somebody else is going to put another apple on the apple cart. This is all building in all these chapters up to trying to present a fairly cogent picture in as not simplistic a way as possible, but as pop culturally acceptable. No, that's wrong. Readable, accessible way possible. And so we could get awfully technical with a lot of this stuff. As you've seen, I've done technical light in some of these chapters and trying to keep it lighthearted at the same time so people can absorb this stuff and get an idea, and you can move on and do some of your own research. So that's why we built up to this. And we're on chapter 7 tonight, which is Constantine, one emperor, one God. It's the title of the chapter. And he was the emperor of Rome, of course. I've got his picture here at the beginning of the chapter. You can take a look. There is Constantine. Now, I'm going to cover some of this in the chapter, but as I've said a couple of other nights, I haven't really reread this book in a long time. You write the book, and you're done, and you move on. And every now and then you read sections for radio shows and things like that. And, Casper, he's sitting on the front porch smoking cigars. And that sounds like a good thing. Oh, and Rocky, since you're out there, I just want you to know, there's a cigar you gave me that morning on Sunday when we were smoking cigars at the cigar shop. And I've been gone, as you know, for the bulk of the last month. And I come home, I open it up, and there's nothing in it. And nobody knows what happened to it. Rocky, you got kids. You got a family. Everybody out there that's got kids. Carl, you've got kids. Casper, I don't know if you do or not. But you know what? If you got kids and you say, all right, who did this? No, I didn't. And it ends up process of elimination. Nobody did it. So my cigar's gone. So we'll have to remedy that soon, Rocky. Anyway, I don't remember what I was saying because I rabbit trailed myself. But remember, too, as I read tonight, There are a few things in this chapter I would have to change. I've got a couple of my facts a little off in this chapter. It's not a big bad thing. It's just an edit I would have had to make prior to publishing. And of course, I didn't discover some of my historical minor errors in this until later. And I'll just tell you, I think I mentioned in here that the Council of Nicaea was where the bishops all were deciding what books would be canonized in the Bible and which would be taken out. And that didn't just happen at the Council of Nicaea. They got the ball rolling there, but it spread into other councils that went for years deciding some of these things. Angela, nice to see you, Angela. I'm glad you've been here. Glad you're loving it. And June, nice to see you too. You got your glass of Pignon. Isn't it pronounced not Pinot Noir? Neuer, it's Pinois, isn't it? Pignon, Nor. My French and Spanish and Greek are all bad. So, Francis, nice to see you. Beliefs evolve for those with open minds. Absolutely, I agree with you. So, without further ado, that's French, and we say that, and do we really know what that means when we say it? Without further goodbye. Without adieu is farewell, see you later in French. So without further farewell, see you, adieu. And I don't know why a parting a phrase would be used in that. Let's move on. Let's get into chapter 7. And I will try not to ADHD too much tonight. I'm saving my ADHD for Rocky's show, which will be, by the way, about 2 hours from now. So 11 o'clock Central, midnight Eastern, Rocky Stucci's Situation Room, and I'll be joining him again tonight. So be sure to tune in. You can tune in on his channel right here on YouTube. And if you see him over in the chat room, you can just click on his icon and you get to him if you're not already a friend of his. So here we go. Chapter 7. Constantine, one emperor, one God. The story of the Nephilim and their divine parentage is one that the early church fathers did not want told. And may I say here, already insert something? Doesn't seem church fathers want it told now. If the problems I ran into asking the question at seminary back almost 40 years ago, 35 years ago, were to be a gauge of that. They were like, we don't talk about that here. So the story of the Nephilim and their divine parentage is one that the early church fathers did not want told, at least in the entire form as it's written down in the Book of Enoch. It was a tale that transgressed the church's teachings that spirit beings were sexless and spoke of beings who were considered to be gods among early mankind. Their presence in the story of Noah's flood was something that created ecclesiastical panic among the early church fathers. And when push came to shove, there was no unanimous consensus. And Enoch was booted from the canon of God-breathed scripture. This was done under the influence of Rome's first Christian emperor, Constantine, who ruled from 306 to 337 of the Common Era. Now, a little commentary here. I know there are other points of view, and I've gone a little head-to-head on this with Jeff Dougherty, who believes that the copies of the Book of Enoch that were found in later centuries were all forgeries. And did it even really exist as an actual book? And I believe it did, because you've got, even in the New Testament scriptures, you've got Jesus quotes from the Book of Enoch. You have the Book of Jude quotes the Book of Enoch. You have Paul quoting from the Book of Enoch. You've got some of the minor prophets in the Old Testament that quoted from the Book of Enoch. Now, the copies that we have may be modern. By modern, I mean within the last 1,000 years. Maybe modern day forgeries or rewrites or edits or reconstructions of that book. But what we do know is that when the councils of Constantine, Nicaea, where this process of canonizing scripture, and all that means is, if you haven't heard that term before, or have heard it and don't know what it means, they were deciding which books of the Bible should be included in the Bible and which should be taken out. And they were under mandate to do this by unanimous vote. And we'll get into that as we read this chapter a little bit. But the Book of Enoch was a book that they decided was, well, they were split on it. They couldn't come to unanimous decision. And so they took it and they put it in the apocryphal books. Now, the Council of Nicaea took place right around 325 BC or AD. So within 300 years of the time of Christ, you had the Book of Enoch that they were considering whether or not it should be included in the canon of Scripture. And because they couldn't decide, they moved it out into the apocryphal books. So now, let's move on with this. Let's see, where did I leave off? Their presence, this is talking to the Nephilim, in the story of Noah's flood was something that created ecclesiastical panic among the early church fathers. And when push came to shove, there was no unanimous consensus, and Enoch was booted from the canon of God-breathed scripture. This was done under the influence of Rome's first Christian emperor, Constantine, who ruled from 306 to 337 CE of the Common Era. Constantine used his power to establish and promote the religion of Christianity, but he always remained a controversial figure, especially through the eyes of those who recorded his histories, which are abundant and detailed, but have been strongly influenced by the official propaganda of the period and are often incredibly skewed. According to the various contradictory accounts of the life of Constantine, he was seen by some as the great Christian prince, and by others during his decline as a noble war hero corrupted by Christian influences, who transformed into a tyrannical despot in his old age, a hero degenerating into a cruel and dissolute monarch. Among the great accomplishments of Emperor Constantine were his ecclesiastical councils, which came as he began to enter the latter part of his reign. It's said that he did not personally adopt Christianity until well into his 40s, which was kind of a little older back then than it is now. But once he did, he instituted laws that allowed Christians to worship and practice freely in the Roman Empire, as well as any other religion. Constantine's sessions going on within the Catholic Church at the time, mainly because he disliked what he considered to be the risks to societal stability that religious disputes and controversies brought with them. So in a sense, he was almost incorporating, long before the founding of the United States, an ideal of separation of church and state for the sake of policy. But that changes as it goes on, and you'll see. Take a sip here. Hey, Janine. Hey, kitten. I see you there. Thanks for being here. All right. Now, let's see. And so, Constantine sought wherever possible to establish an orthodoxy. In fact, the emperor saw it as his duty to ensure that God was properly worshipped in his empire. And so you see where he was having problems with the influence on religious discussions, the influence on governmental polity by religious discussions. He went ahead and solved that problem, not at first by having this kind of separation of church and state. We're going to kind of separate these things, but then he went whole hog the other direction and completely incorporated, in a sense, it was empirical religion, because he was saying that God needed to be properly worshipped in his empire, and that proper worship would be determined by the church. All right. So now, and it's something interesting to note too, and because I have not reviewed these chapters in years, just reading them raw, just like I'm anybody else who just picked the book up off the shelf and said, oh, I'm going to read this. So I don't know if I address this further on in this chapter, but Constantine was anything but a Christian. He was a Christian in name only, and he did this for specific reasons. And I know we'll get to that because I hint at it in the title of the chapter. Constantine, one emperor, one God. And so Constantine was about as pagan as they come. And he was about as vile as they come for being a Christian emperor. He murdered members of his family, his own son, that he felt were going to wrest the throne from him. And so in order to protect, in his older age, to protect his throne, which he's going to die soon anyway, he's killing family members off so they wouldn't take it away from him. And I would think that if you're an emperor and you've got all that power, there are things you can set up and things you could do or could have done in the past to ensure that nobody's going to set out to try to kill you to take the throne, especially your own kid. So he obviously didn't do those things because he feared his own family. And at the same time, he lived a life as corrupt and hedonistic and heathenistic as any of the other Roman emperors, and then did his deathbed conversion to Christianity, even though he had been supporting Christianity his whole life and made it the state religion. Let's move on. The first ecclesiastical council summoned by Constantine was the Council of Nicaea in 325 of the Common Era, in which several church resolutions were discussed and set into motion. And by the way, keep in mind, he had established himself as the Pope. So he was the Pope of the Catholic Church in the 300s during his reign. So here he was, the emperor and also the head of the church. Among them of these resolutions was the beginnings of the canonization of Scripture, which set a precedent for removing from the Scriptures any book on which the entire council could not unanimously agree. The Book of Enoch, despite its many mentions throughout the writings of both the Old and New Testaments, as well as being quoted by Moses and the Apostle Paul, was not unanimously accepted, and it fell under the surgical knife of the council. Keep at the forefront of your mind now, when considering the facts behind the Council of Nicaea, the overall motivations on the part of the Emperor Constantine when summoning them. Although Constantine's reputation was bolstered by his propaganda machine, it is well known that he was motivated by the desire to establish only two things. He was only after two things. Keep this in mind when you think of Constantine. Number one God equals one emperor. Two, one religion equals one empire. Constantine didn't think, I think, didn't give a rat's ass what conclusions the council came to. He just said it better damn well be unanimous, because if this is going to be the religion that I am sanctioning in the empire, I want it to be known that my empire is going to be a reflection of religion and vice versa. One God equals one emperor, one religion equals one empire. Period. Now, Constantine was above all a pragmatist, and his Christianity was only prominent when it was politically expedient for him. And he didn't become more compassionate after his conversion to Christianity. On the heels of presiding over the Council of Nicaea, he went immediately back home to Constantinople and murdered both his wife, Fausta, and his eldest son, Crispus. Fausta, this is right on the heels of the Council of Nicaea, where they settled on the Nicene Creed, where they started the process of canonizing Scripture. He's the Pope of the Church. He's establishing one God, one empire, one religion, one emperor, or one God, one emperor, one religion, one empire. Goes home from the trip and kills his wife and his eldest son. Fausta was Crispus's stepmother, and there were rumors that she and Crispus had been engaged in immorality while the emperor was away. Now, you can use your imagination on that one. I don't think they went out stealing and burglarizing people's homes. I think their immorality was more of a sexual nature. And so Constantine had his wife, get this, Christian emperor. What would a Christian emperor do? If you were the emperor or the empress, you find out your mate is cheating on you with one of your kids, what would be your reaction? Would we rage and anger and what was it King Arthur said in the play Camelot? I will have a man's vengeance, he claims. Or would you take on the role of, you said, I am the head of the church. I'm a Christian. There are certain things I will not abide. There are consequences for actions. I'm angered. I'm enraged. But what would be your reaction? Would it be, I'll divorce the queen, I'll exile her, I'll do this? No, what did he do? Get this. Constantine had his wife slowly boiled to death in a bath, and his son was cold poisoned. Indeed, Constantine was the poster boy for living your life as licentiously and perverted as possible, saving baptism for his deathbed, which is exactly what he did. He lived his life as wickedly as any other Roman emperor, despite the paths he paved for Christianity and its spread, and went screaming into heaven simply because he was baptized minutes before he died. Now, we think of this from a point of biblical lifestyle or biblical living as a Christian. Christians were supposed to be forgiving, but they weren't supposed to be doormats either, in accordance with Scripture. There were consequences for actions. There was personal accountability. However, that does not mean that Christians had to be loving and forgiving. Oh, I love you, and we're just going to go on. And that was the ideal. There was supposed to be a following Christ type of attitude, one that forgave and moved on and lived a life of forgiveness. But Constantine, as the emperor, did what every other emperor would have done. He put people to death, even his own family, his own wife, his own son, put them to death because of the adulterous affair they were having. And there was, of course, talk of conspiracy. And, of course, to have sex with the emperor's wife, the empress, illicitly have an affair with her, that was instant death penalty stuff. So, as a Christian, should he have abided by that? Or was he just following suit? When you are the emperor, do you put people to death who do that? Was that the right thing to do? We look back at the Old Testament as an example. How many people did King David, the sweet psalmist of Israel, the man after God's own heart, how many people did he put to death or have put to death as the king that were threats to his throne or threats to the woman he impregnated, uncovering his adulterous affairs? He did this kind of thing. All through the Bible, you have the God of the Old Testament commanding to destroy whole cities that you're conquering. He says, man, woman, child, sheep, goats, babies, down to every last thing, completely wiped out. And this was supposed to be God telling them to do this. To me, sorry to say, for all my Bible-believing friends and the background I come from, that sounds more like what man would do and claim God ordered him to do it. Does a loving God do that? Does a holy God even do that? Which was always the caveat for everything for us. Oh, it's the holiness of God that made him do certain things with his wrath. And so the question is, was Constantine, being only, he's only 3 centuries removed from ancient, even more ancient times when these things took place, was he just doing what other rulers of the day would have done? And the same with David, the same with these. And then, by the way, I've mentioned this book once before. This is an aside. If you want to read a really, really good book, get your pencil, write this down, or listen back later and write it down. It's by Joel Baden, B-A-D-E-N. He is a Old Testament professor at Yale University, and at least he was when he wrote the book. And it's entitled King David, and it's subtitled The Real History, No, the real life history of an invented hero. And so he says in his book, I don't deny that David existed at all. He says the evidence is too great. He says denying that would be stupid. He says what I do deny is that he was the man that the Bible paints him to be. And he breaks down all the writings about the life of David. And he said, pretty much what you see here, you see the pattern of writing shows it was an apologetic. Somebody else was writing this about David, and an apologetic to draw people to believe David was closer to God than he was. David was the godly man that he was, and so on. And he concludes pretty much in the book, David would not have been somebody you probably would have liked. He was probably just as heinously self-serving and viciously brutal as other Middle Eastern monarchs of the day. And he was not a nice man. And so this is what, I bring this all up because my mind goes there with this whole thing about what kind of emperor Constantine was. And so he was a guy that wanted to make sure for political expediency and opportunism, if you will, that the people believed he was promoting Christianity and that he himself was a Christian, when indeed his actions did not match up to that. He was a Roman emperor in the 300s AD, and he was brutal. So, and then he took last rites as they were back in the 300s, and he 337 when he died, and he asked to be baptized on his deathbed, which they did. And according to what he thought, he went screaming into heaven. So, within the first 400 years of Christianity, there were in existence more than 20 Gospels. If you look at your New Testament now, there are 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. At this time, there were more than 20 of them that were being accepted into as scriptural, God-breathed. There were 15 apocalypses and nearly 50 other texts about Jesus. And in some of these texts, Jesus didn't die. He took revenge on his enemies. Could you see that? Sorry, folks, if you're Christian. Jesus, too. Jesus, he's back and he's kicking butt. That's the way some people, he took revenge on his enemies, according to some of these writings about Jesus that existed in the 300s. Some say he wasn't human at all. He was not God at all, and was a wise teacher instead of a miracle worker. The Gospel of Thomas, attributed to Doubting Thomas. Remember Doubting Thomas? He says, unless I put my fingers in the holes in his hands and shove my hand in the spear thrust in his side, I'm not going to believe. And then Jesus, of course, appears in the room. Here I am, Thomas. Give me your finger. And Thomas dropped to his knees and he said, my Lord and my God. And so on. And so Doubting Thomas. The Gospel of Doubting Thomas has been discovered in its entirety, and it contains what is claimed to be direct quotes from Jesus, yet it's been left out of the Bible. The Gospel of Peter, Jesus' best friend among the disciples, says Jesus was silent on the cross and didn't feel any pain, for he only appeared to be human. Yet this gospel was also left out of the Bible. Only a select 4 of the written Gospels made it into the final New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And only those Gospels that told their followers that what the early Roman Church wanted them to hear. Constantine's desire to have one single authority in the church apparently worked out pretty well for him. Now, keep in mind, we've said that there are many things we know in Scripture that you look at and you can speculate and say, this is what the church fathers, the early church fathers, wanted you to believe. And so they omitted things. You look at things like Mary Magdalene. How do they paint her in the New Testament? She's a whore. She's a hooker. She's a harlot. She's the one who comes in and washes Jesus' feet with her hair and perfumes his feet. She is also the one, they say, that is ascribed to when Jesus said, "Let he who is without sin among you cast the first stone," because a bunch of guys were dragging this woman that was caught in the act of adultery, and they were going to stone her. And they asked Jesus, "What do you think we should do with her?" And that's where it says, and Jesus stooped down and started writing in the dust with his finger. And then he stood up and he said, "Let he who is without sin among you cast the first stone." And it says they all, one by one, left. Jesus stooped down and continued to write in the dirt. Then he looks up and it's just the woman. And he says, "Where are all your accusers?" And she said, "They've all gone." And Jesus said, "Then so should you." And he says, "Now go and don't do this anymore." It says in the Bible, there's such haughty language that we put there. "Go thou and sinnest no more." In other words, Jesus, he looked at her and he said, "Go and stop. Just stop doing this. And you aren't going to get in trouble." The big question that always plagued me in that scene, where was the guy she was having adultery with? How come he wasn't being dragged out to be stoned too? So there was it was a setup. We all know that. But some people say that was Mary Magdalene. So they started amalgamating all these different women into being who Mary Magdalene was. And yet you find in some of the other gospels that were kicked out of the Bible by these councils, they said that Mary was the great teacher. She was the wife of Jesus, some of them said. She was the one left behind. I think it was the Gospel of Mattathias that said, or maybe it was the Gospel of Philip. She was the one that was left behind after the death of Jesus to pick up the mantle and be the great teacher. She was the one the disciples would go to because she was the wife of Jesus. So you can see how the early church fathers tried to write her out. And then they came up with the whole idea of celibacy for the priests. I mean, good grief. We all know the problems we see today with certain priests. It's not all of them, and I don't think it's an overall issue with the Catholic Church. I think it's an issue they have with certain members of their priesthood. You can't write off good men along with the bad. There are some men that are dedicated to that, but it's like the old cartoon drawing I saw once in a ministerial leadership magazine back when I was in ministry. It shows a monk and he's banging his head on the wall, and another monk with his eyes wide open. He's holding an old scroll in his lap, and he says, "Celebrate, not celibate." And he's banging his head on the wall, like, "Oh, we misinterpreted that. It's celebrate, not celibate." And so there you go. Celibacy for the priest. What could possibly go wrong there? You take a guy as holy as any guy could be, as targeted, as focused on serving God and doing things good for the people want to be. And you know what? There's going to be a day where he goes, "Sheesh, boobs. Whew. Yeah, I like them. Sorry, God, forgive me. I'm sorry I had a lustful thought." Humans were made to lust for each other or it wouldn't happen. It's a natural part of our physiology. And that leads to copulation. And that leads to propagation of species. So, you know what? This whole celibacy thing, look what I'm giving up for God. I'm giving up my right to have sex with a woman or to even look on one and lust after one. Oh, and if I do, I should make this little whip and whip myself in my chamber at night to punish myself for my sin. And you know what? I was always of the belief, even when I wasn't in a Catholic church, I was in a Baptist church, which I call the Catholics of the Protestant world. But I was always one to think that I can't do anything that's good enough for God. This is what we taught in our theology. There was nothing you could do that was good enough to earn your way to everlasting life or to salvation in heaven after you died. Because if I could earn it, this was the theology I believed. if I could earn it, why did the Son of God have to come and die to pay the price for me? That death would be inefficacious. It would have no meaning if I could do it myself. And this was the theology I was in. That's why I believed that salvation, as the New Testament stated, was a free gift of God. All you had to do was accept it. And then you strove to live the life. You couldn't earn it. It was a gift. So the same thing with priests. Being celibate, could you imagine being celibate all your life, and then you're an old wrinkled man with a nutsack that hangs down to your knee joint, and you go, what? I could have had sex for the last 50 years? So imagine that. So anyway, all joking aside, I think it was manufactured by the church to accomplish what they wanted accomplished. Now, here are the lost books referred to in the Bible, but removed by the councils under Constantine. The Book of Jasher. Now, Joshua mentions the Book of Jasher. 2 Samuel mentions the Book of Jasher. It's gone. The Book of Acts of Solomon. 1 Kings talks about that in the Book of the Acts of Solomon, but it's gone. The Book of Samuel the Seer. 1 Chronicles mentions that book, but it's gone. The Book of Gad the Seer. 1 Chronicles mentions that book also, but it's gone. The Book of Nathan the Prophet. Now, Nathan was the guy who pointed the finger at King David. Thou art the man, he said. And after the sin with Bathsheba and the murdering of Bathsheba's husband. And the Book of Nathan, 1 Chronicles mentions that, and 2 Chronicles mentions that book, but the book's gone. Prophecy of Ahijah. Or, I'm sorry, they're not gone. They were all removed, is what I mean by that. The prophecy of Ahijah, 2 Chronicles mentions it, but the council removed it. It's gone. Visions of Iddo the seer, Book of Shemaiah, the Book of Jehu, the sayings of the seers, the lament for Josiah. All of those are mentioned in the Book of 2 Chronicles, but they're gone. They were taken out. Paul's epistle to the Corinthians before our 1 Corinthians is gone. Paul's epistle to the church at Laodicea, Colossians 4 mentions that one. It's gone. It was removed. So now that brings us to one of the big ones, the Book of Enoch. So you look at all these things that were removed by the Council of Nicaea and the following councils. A lot of the Gospels, remember there were 20 Gospels, there were 70 plus or 50 plus other writings about the life of Jesus. Wouldn't that have been interesting if you were Christian and studying your faith to have been able to read these books? What were they about? Who wrote them? Why did they write them? And how did the council come to the determination that only some were inspired or God-breathed and the others were not? And as for Constantine, he didn't give a rat's bahookie. He said, just come to unanimous decision. Now, the Book of Enoch. Because we've spent so much time talking about and around and quoting from the Book of Enoch, as well as mentioning its exclusion from the scriptural canon, it seems time to give a little bit of history about the author and the book itself. The Book of Enoch is an ancient Jewish religious manuscript ascribed to, guess who? Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, the same Noah associated with the ark and the flood account of Genesis 6 through 9. So that kind of dates the book to way back in biblical history. If you're talking pre-Noahic flood, you're talking antediluvian world there. And according to the New Testament book of Jude, the 7th generation from Adam. That means Adam was like his 7th generation great-grandfather. And I believe some of these guys, at least in accordance to the dates of the lengths of lives in the Old Testament, some of these guys were still alive. Adam may still have been alive, or at least some of his descendants still alive, because they lived hundreds and hundreds of years. And by the way, that is attributed, I don't think I mentioned that in here at all, because it wasn't germane to the discussion, but some of the attribution of old life has been speculated to be this, that the flood of Noah when it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, keep in mind, it wasn't just rain. It didn't just rain hard for 40 days, which could be pretty catastrophic. But it said the windows of heaven were opened and the fountains of the deep broken open. That means there were some biblical scholars that believed all these underground caverns we have, they were all formed in the gushing forth of the underground waters. And that the earth, there is some scientific evidence for this, I don't have it on the top of my head, but that the earth was enveloped by more or less a water canopy. That if you would go outside on any given day, pre-flood, antediluvian world, you could see the sun, but it would be hazy. It would be like living in a thick, dense dew point in high humidities all the time, because the earth had a misty water canopy about it. And that the breaking of the heavens open was meant to be something that meant this canopy was broken and it all gushed down onto the surface of the earth. And so the first blue sky anybody ever saw in the human race was post-flood, according to that theory. And I think that theory exists whether you believe the flood took place or not. Something catastrophic happened. So and that's why they say, by the way, the UV rays of the sun were blocked by that. And that could have had the effect of rendering human life and other kinds of life much longer, because they were not degraded by the radiation from the sun. So goes the theory. All right. Janine, you say that council of bishops were crooked. Very possibly. But were they all crooked? There's the question. Like you could say, there are Catholic priests that are child molesters. But does that mean all Catholic priests are child molesters? Hell no. I think there are probably some very good men that are Catholic priests. But that get discolored completely by the fact that we see the relative handful of priests that commit heinous acts against children, sexual misconduct, sexual perversion. Those are the ones that color the priesthood. I never like to go along with the bandwagon mentality in anything, politics, religion, anything else. So I think there are probably very good people in the priesthood today, and they shouldn't color the whole of the priesthood, whether you believe in it or not. It's like I say, there are a lot of people who will take Islam and discolor it completely as a religion that is set to kill you and take away your rights. Yet I know Muslims who want nothing to do with that, but they follow their religion still. So it's that kind of thing. The Book of Enoch is an ancient Jewish manuscript ascribed to Enoch, the great-grandfather, okay, 7th generation from Adam. Enoch is one of those ancient manuscripts that was dropped out of the now traditional biblical canon. The word canon comes from the Greek kanon, meaning rule. Simply said, you won't find Enoch's book in a current day Bible, but it is grouped with several other, what was that word? Several other books referred to as the apocryphal writings, meaning they were considered to be hidden, esoteric, spurious, or of questionable authenticity by the church leaders of the day. So if it was esoteric, it was spurious, according to the church, which is a big problem. Jeannie says they ordered the savage killings against the Gnostics. They did. Some are good, yes, but they still turn their heads when they know the undertone is boinking. Whoever. Sure. Or the other one is boinking whoever. Sure. And I think that there were probably times within the church's history where they feared for their lives if they were to go against what the church said. Let's see. Which, by the way, how could the Spanish Inquisition ever be considered an act of God, an act of Christian love? I'm going to set you in a steel chair or an iron chair on top of a pyre of fire and let your flesh melt off of you until you confess that you are a devil. And then we'll just burn you to finish it up. You know, how could they do things like this to people? That is not humane. That is not, it's pure human, because pure humans left to their pure form are corrupt. You have to work to be good. Good doesn't come naturally to people. What does come naturally to people is what you see little kids doing when they fight for territory. Lord of the Flies is what happens to people left to their natural state. It is Einstein's theory of relativity to the nth degree. All things degrade and fall into entropy on an equal level. And it's like I've always said, life is a piece of shit in general. And it's what you do with that piece of shit that determines the kind of person you're going to be. Life left to itself will degrade. If I lived in this house and didn't do the dishes ever, didn't make sure the food was put away so that it didn't rot, didn't pick up dog shit if the dog shit in the house, what would this place look like? It would degrade. There would be a natural degradation. You have to fight against degradation to make something good take its place. Same with life. Always look on the bright side of life. I can't whistle. But life's a piece of shit when you think of it. And blah, blah, blah. And the song goes on. That's my philosophy about life. But it's what you do with it that makes it good, that makes it better. And although the Book of Enoch is considered to be questionable by Judaism and all of Christianity, it is regarded as canon by the Ethiopian Orthodox and the Eritrean Orthodox churches. The Book of Enoch, along with several other apocryphal books, were excluded from the Bible during the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE. And that's my what I talk to be my clerical or historical blunder. It wasn't just at the Council of Nicaea. There were future councils that did this. But this is where it started, which was convoked, the Council of Nicaea, by the Roman Emperor Constantine, the first Christian emperor of the Roman Empire. But Constantine's status as a Christian is held in as dubious regard as some of the books that his empirically appointed church emissaries booted out of the Bible. The first section of the Book of Enoch, the Dead Sea Scrolls, describes the fall of a group of non-human entities known as the Watchers. The B'nai Ha-Elohim, as we've already covered ad infinitum in the beginning of this book. The sons of God who fathered the Nephilim. Their descent to the earth is chronicled not only in the Book of Enoch, but also in the Old Testament's Book of Genesis, where the subject was edited down to a few mere sentences by either Moses himself or by later scribes, reconstructing his work. In the Genesis 6:1-4 passage, we find Moses doing what Moses often did, abbreviating and extrapolating vital information without much detail. The passage is obviously a series of quotations from a much older source regarding the Nephilim, but contains distinct earmarks of having been edited at a later date, as the writing style doesn't match that of the rest of the book. And as we mentioned a couple of times in the reading and in the commentary, keep in mind, after the Babylonian captivity, which was in the 500s BC, and the emperor, the king of Babylon, released all the children of Israel, as they called them, all the Israelites they had in captivity. They go home. We're done. See ya. So he sends them all home. They go back. The temple's been destroyed. They rebuild the temple. Their scriptures have been destroyed. So they take 72 rabbis, go to the Library of Alexandria. What a place that must have been. They go to the Library of Alexandria and ask permission of Ptolemy II, the Greek pharaoh of Egypt, to reconstruct. They ask permission to reconstruct the Hebrew scriptures, which is what they did. And we end up with the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, which is what you hold in your hands when you pick up a modern Bible. The Old Testament is the Septuagint, which is what they reconstructed. All of that recap to say these are the things that they reconstructed. And this is probably why the books of Moses are so messed up in places. Why you have no history really recorded in the book of Exodus. No names of pharaohs. Although, as I have said, some of that might have been Moses just not wanting to give them life, which was an Egyptian way of thinking spiritually. So there you go. There's a little recap on that. So despite, and so the later, the writing of that section that Moses has on the Nephilim, the whole point I was making is that probably a scribal edit because it doesn't match the style of writing of the rest of the book of Exodus. So let's see. Michelle didn't realize I was on. Jeff and I had a conflict tonight with our scheduling. And so always watch. If you haven't clicked on it, folks, if you're not subscribed below, subscribe. And if you're subscribed, click on the little bell next to that. That will give you notifications. At least in theory, that's what that's supposed to do. And if you follow my Facebook page, I put up a post every morning that could bring you right back to this page, and it'll have a countdown saying how many hours and minutes until we start the broadcast. So subscribe, hit the bell, and Michelle, my bell, hit the bell, and you'll be notified. It's supposedly. That's supposed to work that way of when we're doing broadcasts. So I put that up I think when I put it up this morning, it says broadcast begins in like 8 hours or something like that. So it had to be around 1 this afternoon. I put that up. So if you missed it, you just missed it. So let's see. Let's move on. Despite modern scholars dating the authorship of the Book of Enoch to a time period in Jewish history known as the captivity, which is during that time in Babylon, around the 3rd or 4th century BC, when the diaspora, the scattered nation of Israel, were living in Babylon, Enoch is a much older book. In the New Testament Book of Jude, and by the way, they ascribe the writing of Enoch to the 400s BCE. Why? This is when the Old Testament was recompiled after the Babylonian captivity. And it was rewritten at that time. The older version, the original book, goes all the way back. Let's see. Enoch is a much older book. In the New Testament Book of Jude, the Book of Enoch is quoted. An obvious authorship attributed to Enoch, the 7th generational descendant from Adam. Jude 1:14-15 says, Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied about them. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone and to convict all of them, or all of the ungodly acts they've committed in their ungodliness, and all of the defiant words ungodly sinners have spoken against him. That's a quote from the Book of Enoch in the Book of Jude in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul, who wrote the little epistle of Jude, was an educated member of the Jewish Sanhedrin prior to his conversion to Christianity. And the Book of Enoch was very well known to his educated religious class. And the Book of Enoch opens with these brief words about Enoch himself, saying, this is Enoch chapter 1, verse 2, Enoch, a just man, whose eyes were opened by God so that he saw a vision of the Holy One in the heavens, which the sons of God showed to me, and from them I heard everything and knew what I saw. That's Paul talking. By the way, if you listen to any of Jeff's work, you know that there is an issue with the Apostle Paul and him calling himself an apostle, how he hijacked Christianity. Yet he's saying here, listen to what he says. He says, my eyes were opened by God, just like Enoch's, and I saw a vision of the Holy One in the heavens, which the sons of God, in the Hebrew, the B'nai Ha-Elohim, showed to me. And from them I heard everything, and I knew what I saw. So there's the question. Did Paul actually see a vision from the sons of the Elohim, those of the Elohim, or was he creating this all out of whole cloth? This fragmentary manuscript is similar to portions of the Book of Jubilees, an important writing of the Second Temple Judaism that survived only among Christian readers that has long been known to us from versions in Greek and Ethiopic. Among Ethiopian Christians, Jubilees was so treasured that it actually became part of their version of the Old Testament. 15 fragmentary pieces of Jubilees have turned up among the Dead Sea Scrolls, establishing the work as one of the most common among those caches and clearly testifying to its importance for those who hid the texts. Like the Ethiopian Christians, they may have considered the book a part of canon of Holy Writ. In that light, the Book of Enoch seems to be a retelling of the Book of Jubilees, just as Genesis seems to be a very brief highlight of what is found in the Book of Enoch in its Nephilim segment. It may be that we should consider Enoch an example of a rewritten Bible. The interpretive phenomenon we encounter is so often in the scrolls. Surviving fragments of the scrolls labeled 4Q227 relate to Jubilees 4:17 through 24, but give the material in a different order. Jubilees 4:18 reports that the angels taught Enoch the calendar. Jubilees 4:22 says that Enoch testified against the Watchers, or the fallen angels, who had taken human wives and whose progeny were giants. So Enoch testified against them. It's interesting. Jubilees 4:23 speaks of the judgment of the entire world. Fragment 2:2i, Enoch, after we taught him, he was with the angels of God 6 full jubilees, the land into the midst of the sons of man, and he testified against them all, and also against the Watchers. And he wrote all heaven and the ways of their hosts and holy ones, so that the righteous ones shall not commit error. And this is all broken up, by the way, in these bracketed parentheses, because not all the words are there. And so this is what they got out of that fragment. So let's wrap up this chapter. I said it was a shorter chapter tonight. Ancient cosmology. According to Hindu philosophy, life in the universe is created, destroyed, and recreated once every cycles, is a repeating period of time divided by 4 yugas, or epochs, or eras. The cycles are said to repeat like the seasons of the year, waxing and waning within a greater time cycle of the creation and destruction of the universe. Wouldn't that account for the age of the earth? Take that, young earth creationists. Like summer, spring, winter, and autumn, each yuga involves stages or gradual changes that the earth and the consciousness of mankind goes through as a whole. These cycles, devolving from light to darkness, are the Sata Yuga, the Tetra Yuga, the Dvarpara Yuga, and finally the Kali Yuga, which is what we're supposed to be in now. A complete Yuga cycle from a high golden age of enlightenment to a dark age, and back again, is said to be caused by the solar system's motion around another star, a binary star system that rotates around our solar system. A good person to hail to on this would be Walter Crittenden. He actually wrote, when I was publishing Intrepid magazine, he was one of the first big authors I had in the magazine. He was in issue number 1, and he wrote on the cycles and the binary star system and all of this. And it's very interesting work. Look up Walter Crittenden. For those of you as old as me, or thereabouts, you'll remember Colonel Crittenden, at your service, sir. And you'll get the reference to that. Spelled the same way is the point I'm making. Now, in accordance with this cosmology, we're currently in the final Yuga cycle, the Kali Yuga, which is the darkest of the seasons, also known as the age of the male demon, Kali, and the age of vice. According to the Surya Siddhanta, Kali Yuga began at midnight on 18th of February, 3102 BCE, and will last for 432,000 years. So we still got a ways to go. And that is where I bring that chapter to an end. And the next chapter is chapter 8, entitled The Nephilim. We're going to get into the shit in the next chapter. Now, I just see I've got a Shakespeare quote from Hamlet. Hamlet 2, at the beginning of the Nephilim chapter. What a piece of work is a man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, in form and moving, how express and admirable. In action, how like an angel. In appreciation or apprehension, how like a god. It's from Shakespeare. So that's what we're going to get into tomorrow in the reading of chapter 8. Now, I wanted to mention something too here. I've talked about this on either Jeff's show, probably Jeff's show. I had an old seminary professor in talking about these yugas and the life, the earth, all of creation, creating and destroying and recreating itself. We had a seminary professor, and the seminary I attended was in the same building as the Christian high school I attended. It was one of those big fortress churches in Minneapolis. And if you're from Minneapolis, it was the Fourth Baptist Church down on West Broadway and Emerson and Fremont. Had a huge facility there. And they had the radio station in the high school and from kindergarten through high school. They owned Pillsbury College in southern Minnesota. They owned Central Baptist Theological Seminary. And all of this was all conglomerated in there. So it was a big place. And through some of the people I knew, I had my first job as an artist in a little print shop. It wasn't a print shop. It was a publishing company. It was James and Clock Publishing. And they took old theological manuscripts that were out of copyright. They'd run down and copyright them. After 76 years, they'd fallen out of copyright. And they were mostly, a reference educational books. And I worked with them, putting those together, drawing pictures for dust jackets and things like that. Well, at that time, I met a bunch of the seminary professors and seminary students and people like that. And I was in high school. And one of the people I met was Dr. Bernard Northrup. And I would go and sit in his office, and I had the hots for his daughter, by the way, which we went out on one date and it never went anywhere. I'll just tell you that for free. But I used to sit in Dr. Northrup's office and talk about his stuff. He had cool stuff around his office. And I drew pictures for him for poetry that he had written and stuff like that. And he would talk about this theory he came up with, which is not his theory alone, but he expanded on it. He called it the gap theory. And that is addressing the gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Period. Empirical statement in the Hebrew. Finished, complete statement. Verse 2. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the waters. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters and said, let there be light. And there was light. And thus begins the creation story. The language in verse 2 is not a recap of an empirical statement made in verse 1. It seems to be the earth was rendered without form and void, or became darkness again. And so there's a gap there in the language, in the linguistics. So that was my first real introduction into this whole thing of the Yugas without him saying anything about the Yugas. Excuse me, I got a little scratch in my throat from just a few minutes ago. So it's an interesting topic. Is the earth, we used to believe the earth was young, relative. God created a mature universe and a mature planet. And he created, a mountain range that was 1 million years old by date, but was really only 7,000 years old because he created it mature. That was our explanation to get around the biblical dating and to get around the evolutionary theory. And yet, I think there's lots of room for saying, even within the structure of biblical writing, there is room for eons to have gone by, and millions, if not billions of years. So, yeah, thank you, Audrey. I just took a drink here, and hopefully that's going to calm it down. But I'm just about done. So it's now 10:05 Central Standard Time, 11:05. I go on with Rocky in about 55 minutes. So I'm going to go rest my voice for a while. But first, before I do, let's just scroll through. And if you've got any questions, go ahead and ask them. We'll see if we can address them or any comments you want to make. I'm going to scroll back a bit. I think I saw some of them as we were going. Paul was like the first pope, and he changed his name to Peter, therefore began the tradition of changing their name. Jeannie, I think Paul and Peter were two different guys. They were constantly at loggerheads in the New Testament. Peter didn't like Paul very much, and Paul didn't like Peter very much. Peter represented the messianic, or what's the word I'm looking for? The Jewish version of the messianic story. There were 4 different kinds of messianic trains of thought in first century Judea. Peter's was the Jewish. Paul's was Herodian, which was more Roman. And there were a couple of other ones as well. So they were 2 different people. Peter and Paul were in conflict with each other a lot. And you see it sometimes between the lines, and you see it sometimes overt. And it said the first church schism took place in the Book of Acts between a difference between Paul and Peter. So they were 2 different guys. Paul is likened to the Jesuit and so on. Yes, I think that all fits into a allegorical look, metaphoric look. Let's see. The earth is really a burnt stack of pancakes, all crushed up, made into a ball, so it's a globe. There we go. I am not a flat earther. Let's see. I'm going to go back a little further and just see if there's anything I missed. Yeah. Celibacy, what could go wrong there? They ordered the savage killings of the Gnostics, says Janine. Or Jeannie. I keep reading that, Jeannie. I'm going to do it forever now. I guarantee you. So sorry ahead of time. Let's see. The Holy Wars, yeah. A way to justify mass murder, says Rocky. And again, yeah, it was. It's to instill fear and compliance by example. Some of these things I have no idea what you're referring to when they're there. Let's see, I think I've seen a lot of these. Going back. Okay, I don't see much else. There was something that you said that was very pertinent, and I've missed it. Go ahead and state it at the end here, but in a couple of minutes we'll be done. Angela says, introducing friends to your work, and they love it. Thank you, Angela. And thanks. I try to explain it so that we all get it. What's the use of it's like when the archaic Catholic Church used to preach in Latin, because the words of the Bible were only meant for ordained ears, not for the common man. And so they'd go to church and they'd listen to Latin and yawn. Okay. But I think that there's a reason we need to make things accessible for everybody, understood by everybody. And where it's not understood, you better damn well work hard to make sure what you're saying is understood. Otherwise, what's the use of saying anything? So, Angela says she heard me first in 2015. Learned a lot since then. You started, man. Well, thank you. Thank you, Angela. Like I say, a lot of people putting other apples on the cart. Haircut? Yeah, I got a haircut today. I got all of them cut, as a matter of fact. And the person that did it has never cut my hair before. And they cut it kind of funky. And my hair's going away. I used to have a full thick head of hair, and it used to be dark. And in the last few years, it's gotten progressively more and more white. What is that? What causes that? Old age. But it's gotten whiter and it's going away. So it's very thin. And she cut it in this weird way and it was dry. And she gave me one of those haircuts that you see on like old school janitors or math teachers. You know, it looked like it went straight up and then just kind of swooped back a little bit. And it was all fluffy and the same length on top. And I looked at it, it was all squared off on top. And I said, no, that's not at all what I wanted. And, but I told her it looked fine and she trimmed it up. I got home and, you put stuff in it and say, okay, it's got to look better than that. But yes, I did get a haircut. Thank you very much. So my hair looks great. Thank you, Audrey. Very distinguished and dapper. Extinguished and dapper. Thank you. I said to Rocky today, I said I should color my hair again. I said just color it back down to its original color, facial hair and stuff. And I said, the only reason I don't, women can do it. Women are like, oh, look at your beautiful hair. Oh, I love you. You made it red again. And guys, you do that. Guys will go, oh, look at your lovely hair color. Guys don't do that. And when I do that now, it's like I just look like a guy who's pushing 60 trying to make himself look younger. Doesn't do anything good for me. So if I ever show up with dark facial hair, darker hair, I gave it a shot. And then we'll just let it grow out and shave it off. So my skin looks go, though. Not sure what you mean by that, Angela. Looks go. Looks good or looks rough? Here we are talking about my skin. I got to tell you, my skin, I should have started using lotion on my face when I was 12 instead of 55. So anyway, enough about my facial condition and my skin color. So my skin feels pasty and old. I need to get a suntan is what I need. So that's it, folks. Let's move off of that. And tomorrow night we hit chapter 8. We talk about the Nephilim themselves. It's the title of the book, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. Tomorrow we hammer home on the Nephilim. And by the way, folks, I'll be here at 9 p.m. Central, 10 p.m. Eastern tomorrow night. So the Nephilim, that chapter runs from 161 to holy moly. Still going. There we go. That runs to 205. So 161 to 205, which is 44 pages long. So the longest chapter we read was 48 pages, and it took us 2 hours and 45 minutes. So we'll see how tomorrow goes. So I don't want to conflict with Rocky's show. I don't want to conflict with Jeff's show. I will coordinate with him, but I'm going to start at 9 tomorrow night. And we'll take it from there. And that's all. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. What was that? Let him do his own urine? I missed something in there. So I'll have to look at that. You are a tad translucent. Is translucent a good thing? Maybe I'm like Moses. Go up into the mountain, I come down, my face shines. I got to put a veil over my face. So don't scare y'all. All right, folks, tomorrow night, same time, same station. And I'll see you then. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you listening. And we'll hit it again tomorrow, hard and heavy. Have a good night. Talk to you soon. Don't forget, if you're not subscribed, subscribe. And then hit the little bell so you get notifications. And like the video as well, it helps bring my videos up in ranking on my YouTube page. I would greatly appreciate that. If you like the video, like it. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. I had 1 thumbs down from last night. And or from the other night, from the Alien chapter. So I'd love to find out what people are thinking when they give you a thumbs down. So, unless it's just somebody coming by and giving you a thumbs down to be a dick. So, what else did I have? Other news? Oh, do check out my website. It's just my full name, ScottAllenRoberts.com. And that's Scott with 2 T's, Allen, A-L-A-N, Roberts. ScottAllenRoberts.com. You can see what I do, what I'm all about, my different work. I am a writer, of course. I'm a graphic designer. I've been in advertising for most of my life. I've been freelancing for the last 10, 12 years and doing the same kind of stuff, illustration, design, network or marketing, things like that. And that's what I do. So you can find it all there, and everything there is to know about me, you can find out there, about my work, about my books, about stuff. If you need a book designed or illustrated or anything like that, I'm your man. And that's it for my personal advertising. And I hope to see you again tomorrow. Talk to you soon. Have a good night.